Welcome to the Bird's Eye View. This series is not meant to be a political or cultural commentary, nor is it a nitpick or comprehensive review. What we will be doing is diving into entertainment to try to understand its message, how well it accomplishes this, what we can learn from it, and how it might be improved. So let's look into it. What is the point of Batman Begins? That's the question we're going to ask today to try to figure out what is the message in this movie. What I find very interesting about Batman Begins is that the beginning 2 to 10 minutes really does a great job of symbolizing the overall struggle of the film itself. So before I explicitly look into the nuances of the message itself, I really want to look at that first 2 to 10 minutes because I think it does a great job of setting us up to see the overall conflict. So we open up with seeing Bruce stealing this arrowhead from Rachel. He runs through the forest and then falls into a well. So what is this, first and foremost? Well, he steals. So it opens up with Bruce committing what is a criminal act. He steals from Rachel and then he runs away so that he's not caught. And in so doing, he then falls. And when he falls, he breaks his leg. But rather than him getting in trouble or something bad happening, what happens next? Well, Bruce's father, who happens to be a doctor, comes and rescues him. However, not before, when Bruce is at his lowest point. That's when he gets exposed to bats, which are his greatest fear. So when we think about the order of events here, we think about Bruce running after stealing, doing a criminal act, falling into a well, having to confront his fear because he did something wrong, and when he fell, he broke his leg. So the criminal act made him run away, which made him break his leg and confront his fear, and then his father, instead of giving him some sort of punishment, he then brings him back up and says one of the great lines of this whole movie in general, and what is that?
It's okay. It's okay. You'll be okay.
Will we be needing an ambulance, Master Wayne?
I'll set the bone and take him for an x-ray later.
Very good, sir.
I'm very sorry, sir.
Don't
I've
worry,
told-
it's fine.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Line is, why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And that is one of the crucial differences between what we'll see is Thomas's perspective and, for instance, Ra's al Ghul's perspective. And that, to me, is the fundamental message. The fundamental theme is this dichotomy between how Thomas views the world and how Ra's views the world. And it's somewhat of a struggle for Bruce's soul. And that is why the first part of this film is so important, because we get to see the contrast between Thomas's vision and Ra's vision. Ra's vision is one of brutal and unrelenting justice, which in actuality is vengeance, is revenge. Toward the middle of the training sequence, for instance, he turns to Bruce and says criminals thrive on the indulgence of society's understanding.
Crime cannot be tolerated. Criminals thrive on the indulgence of society's understanding.
This contrast between the two even becomes explicit at times when Ra's brings up, for instance, on the ice sheet, that Thomas did not have the will to act.
Your parents' death was not your fault. It was your father's. Anger does not change the fact that your father failed to act.
A man had a gun.
Would that stop you?
I've had training.
The training is nothing. The will is everything. The will to act.
And this, in his mind, is the difference between him and Thomas. However, it's not that Thomas doesn't have the will to act, but instead that what he does, just like in the example of Bruce, is he tries to give people a second chance. Whereas Ra's, on the other hand, says, just like we talked about before, that compassion is the problem. That compassion, giving people that second chance, are why criminals thrive. That's why criminals take over society and make things worse, because we're constantly giving them second chances. Where Thomas, on the other hand, says the exact opposite. He says, why do we fall? So we can get back up. His whole mindset is one of second chances, is one of helping people who have fallen down to rise back up. Whereas Ra's says if you've fallen, you should stay down and not drag other people down with you. This is where I think it's interesting to bring up their different occupations or roles. Thomas, on one hand, is a healer. He's a doctor. His whole mindset is one of trying to help those who have broken parts of their body, who have certain health issues, to help them heal, to become better. Whereas, as a warrior, as someone with the mindset of fighting against others, Ra's is the exact opposite. Ra's is one of tearing down what is broken and leaving it in ruin, destroying it completely so you can start over. And these roles play into their conceptions of justice. Justice, for Thomas, on one hand, is something of giving people second chances, of looking to see who has fallen, who's not doing well, and trying to bring them back up. Whereas, on the opposite side, Ra's is about seeing who have fallen and making sure they don't drag others down with them. Now, we've talked about that before, but what's interesting here is to look at it in context of Rachel's quote. Following the trial room scene, there's a moment in the car with Rachel, and Rachel turns to Bruce and talks about what she thinks of as justice.
Justice is about harmony. Revenge is about you making yourself feel better.
How she thinks of justice is about harmony. It's about bringing things together. It's about things working well together, about people working well together. Whereas vengeance is just about making yourself feel better. Revenge is about making yourself feel better. And this is even unmasked. It's betrayed in one of the monologues that Ducard, or in this case, Ra's al Ghul, has with Bruce earlier, where he turns to him and says that the reason he was able to get through the loss of his family was because of vengeance. It was because of this feeling, this rage, this anger that he drove into his quest for vengeance.
Your anger gives you great power. But if you let it, it will destroy you. As it almost did me.
What stopped it?
Vengeance.
And he even says that himself. And yet, in his mind, and he talks about this later, justice is about balance. And in this case, though, while balance and harmony sound like they're the same, they sound like they're synonyms, there's a very important difference. The balance that Ra's is talking about is holistic. It's something that is on the grand scale. It's not something that you do or don't do. It's not that you stole something, so therefore something bad needs to happen to you. It's a cosmic balance. It's that there are so many people doing bad things, now everyone must suffer. Now everyone must be judged. So it has two very problematic aspects. The first one is, it's this eye for an eye. Well, you do something wrong, well, you deserve to be judged holistically and once and for all. And that's shown very perfectly when there's the criminal that is brought to Bruce, that Bruce then has to choose how he is going to deal with that criminal. That's one example of that eye for an eye kind of backward justice. However, there's also that cosmic justice that, of course, only Ra's is capable of perceiving. Only he is able to be enlightened enough to see that there are these cosmic balances that he must right. That it's not about the individual actions. It's not about trying to help people on the individual level. It's about how criminals have brought down society on the whole, and he must undermine all of society because of this. Now, before we discuss Bruce's choice and inner struggle, I think it's important to touch on a few other themes that are also spoken on quite a bit, to see how they go with this dichotomy, this balance between Thomas versus, on the other hand, Ra's vision for justice. So, the most important of these is the role fear plays in the story. In my view, fear is something the story tells us that we all have, which is why the toxin Scarecrow uses is potent on everyone. In response to this, there are different ways you can deal with it. You can hide from fear and not confront it. It can overwhelm you, and when it does, it hurts and pushes everyone else away. Think of the reactions that the characters that we saw in Arkham Asylum and on the street had. What happens with these people is that either they fight those around them, or they cower and hide by themselves. And great example of this is Arkham Asylum. All of them are housed in what? These very small singular cells of one or two people, scared and afraid for their lives, all by themselves. So fear has this effect of isolating us if we do not confront it. However, if we do confront this fear, it can give us an immense power. Scarecrow gains power from the use of fear, whereas Batman and Ra's, who have taken the time to really confront their fear and not simply use it against people like Scarecrow, what has happened to them? On one hand, Ra's uses it against people. He uses his mastery of fear against people, to drive them against each other, to bring people down, to hurt. Whereas on the other hand, Bruce uses it very literally to heal, because what does he do? He helps to synthesize the antidote. So what he does is he tries to use fear in a way to help people, where Ra's uses his mastery of fear against people. And so I think that's another very interesting theme that plays into what we talked about earlier. But the other one that I want to hit on is the quote we hear repeated by Rachel and Bruce.
Bruce, deep down you may still be that same great kid you used to be. But it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you.
At least tell me your name.
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
Bruce?
So what in particular does that mean? And secondly, how does it relate to what we've talked about so far? First, it is of note that Ra's al Ghul, because though he may frame himself as being a noble warrior fighting against crime and injustice, and trying to fight on behalf of noble goals like balance and justice, what in reality has he actually done? This is the way that he's actually unmasked, as not being someone who's fighting for good, or fighting on the right side, because though his intentions might be noble, who he is underneath, who he is under the surface, just like the quote says, might be noble. Instead, what he does is he acts like a terrible criminal, like an awful, terrible criminal. And that's how he's unmasked, for being awful because of his actions, because his actions define him. And that's something that Bruce has to learn firsthand, because he begins the movie from the perspective of, in order for him to understand crime, he has to somewhat take part of it, live in the underworld, be around them, breathe in that air, as it were. And as he does, what happens? Well, in reality, if you look at the actions he commits, he becomes more of a criminal. He becomes more of a criminal as he spends more time with them, as he acts more like a criminal. But on the flip side, when he comes back as Batman trying to do the right thing, he then more and more becomes like Thomas, more and more tends toward the good side, not because of what's underneath, because what in fact is underneath is this vengeance, this anger, but instead, because he's doing the right thing, because he's forcing himself to take part in right actions, he then, the underneath, follows behind that. So I think it's this idea that who you are trails what you do. And if you put yourself in the circumstances and do the right things, then you're going to end up being a better person because of it. And the underneath will change because the actions have changed. And finally, all of this brings us to Bruce's core conflict. At first glance, it may appear that after the first act, Bruce has already chosen Thomas's vision. After all, he saves Ducard before he's about to fall, and he chooses not to kill the criminal. But in actuality, he comes back to Gotham still with the warrior mindset, the mindset of Ra's, that he's going to come back and scare criminals. He's going to come back and beat them into submission, as it were. And that mindset is also paired with this disrespect of his father's vision, disrespect of his father's company, of the wealth that it possesses, of thinking that it's all shallow and it doesn't matter and it doesn't mean anything. So Bruce's conflict here comes to a climax during his party, which begins with Bruce openly resenting that he had to participate at all, and ultimately trying to end it short by faking that he's drunk and trying to push everyone away. And then, right towards the end, one of the executives turns to him and says,
"Get out. The apple has fallen very far from the tree, Mr. Wayne."
And this is after, before this scene, Bruce had even said that he didn't even care about his name, which Alfred, of course, retorts that it was his father's name.
Is Fox still here? Yes, sir. We need to send these people away now.
Those are Bruce Wayne's guests out there, sir. You have a name to maintain.
I don't care about my name.
It's not just your name, sir. It's your father's name. And it's all that's left of him. Don't destroy it.
These two symbols lay the groundwork for the emotional moments that will come later when it comes to Ducard, versus Bruce. They have this very important conversation back and forth that does a great job of symbolizing on many different levels and even explicitly talking to us about the differences in visions. And here's where we learn some important facts. First, in actuality, Thomas had fought Ra's years before, when Ra's had used other means, economic means, to try to bring down Gotham. It was Thomas who stood in his way. Thomas, interestingly enough, using the exact methods that Bruce despises, using the hobnobbing with billionaires and millionaires, and the power and the influence that brings. Thomas used all of that to help people, to help bring people out of poverty, to use the wealthy for the poor. And that's exactly what Bruce had disdain for earlier in this scene. But that's exactly what Thomas used against Ra's.
You attacked Gotham before.
Of course. Over the ages, our weapons have grown more sophisticated. With Gotham, we tried a new one, economics. But we underestimated certain of Gotham's citizens, such as your parents.
Furthermore, Ra's even admits that Thomas won. Thomas did revitalize Gotham. He successfully beat the economic terrorism that Ra's was using. And Thomas did it in all of the ways, so far, that Bruce has despised and put down. And then the conversation gets capped off with some very important pieces. First, Ra's talks about what you do to those who stand in the way of justice. And what he says is you walk up behind them and stab them in the heart.
Like your father, you lack the courage to do all that is necessary. If someone stands in the way of true justice, you simply walk up behind them and stab them in the heart.
Then, of course, his minions burn down all of Wayne Manor, and he leaves Bruce for dead. However, Alfred, which in this case is somewhat the voice, the spirit of Thomas, he comes to Bruce, saves him, and they go back down into the Batcave, again symbolizing that descent into darkness, that descent just like the beginning with the well, where you fall back into that hole. That's exactly what Bruce is doing. He falls back in, and what does Alfred say?
I wanted to save Gotham. I failed.
Why do we false? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Why do we fall? So we can get back up. And this line is said in perfect contrast to the line that Ducard or Ra's al Ghul said not that long before, which was that if someone stands in the way, you stab them in the heart. Well, that's the exact opposite of giving someone a second chance. And that is the turning point for Bruce, where Bruce realizes that he needs to imbibe all of Thomas Wayne's ideals, to go at things not in the way that he had been like a warrior, but instead as someone who tries to heal and bring harmony. That justice isn't about balance. It's not about some cosmic chain, some cosmic balance that you have to right. Instead, it's about trying to give people a second chance. It's about trying to heal. It's about trying to live up to Thomas Wayne's ideals. And that's what, in fact, he does. What he does is, at the very end in particular, he rebuilds all of Wayne Manor, and he chooses to take a very active role in his company, taking it back over and now becoming the face of Wayne Enterprises. In effect, quite literally, taking his name back. Just like I was talking about earlier, his name not meaning anything to him. Well, he changed, because he realized that that name stood for much more. It didn't just stand for Thomas. It stood for the ideals of Thomas. And this is something that Alfred says later. He says that Thomas Wayne's legacy was much more than bricks and mortar.
What have I done, Alfred? Everything my family, my father built.
The Wayne legacy is more than bricks and mortars.
Thomas Wayne's real legacy was Bruce Wayne, and more than just Bruce, it was the ideals that he was trying to teach. So this has been a look into the message of Batman Begins. I hope I've done a good job of showing exactly what I think the meaning behind Batman Begins actually is. In the next video, we're going to look into, does it make sense? Does the message make sense? What, in fact, is the quality of Batman Begins? So I'll see you then.